So let's turn to the word panic and see what Columbia Encyclopedia, which is published by Columbia University Press, let's see what they have to say about panics and see how much you learn from this. Panic, quote, crisis in financial and economic conditions marked by public loss of confidence. I'll emphasize that word. It'll come up again. Confidence in the financial structure. Panics are characterized by a general rush of investors to convert their assets into cash, with runs on banks and a rapid fall of the securities market. Bank failures and bankruptcies naturally follow. Does that remind us anything of maybe the year 2008 and thereafter? Afterward, recovery may be quick or gradual. Students of economic cycles, we'll bring that word up, have paid much attention to the process of panics, but without definitive result. Isn't that strange that students of economic cycles have paid much attention to the process of panics, but without definitive results? What do you suppose that is? Well, we'll discuss that too. Perhaps the earliest panic of modern capitalism occurred during 1720 in France and England, known as the Mississippi Bubble, and we'll be discussing that. It was touched off by wild speculation in the stock of John Law, and we'll be talking about him. His colonizing company, John Law's colonizing company. The first real panic in the United States came in 1819, after the War of 1812, and after credit for Western expansion had been overextended. That of 1837 was much more severe. It was brought on partly by banking instability and by President Andrew Jackson's suppression of the Bank of the United States. He's kind of the fall guy. But mainly by irresponsible financial operations in Western lands. The crisis of 1857 was partly caused by massive European speculation in American railroads. Thus, when the panic struck, it affected both Europe and the United States. In 1869, stock manipulations brought on the panic known as Black Friday. In 1873, there was a financial crisis in Vienna, as well as an American panic, marking the bitter contest between agrarians caught by overextended credit and the financial interests. That conflict continued and was again reflected in the crisis that came in the panic of 1907. No great panic, they say, occurred again until 1929. However, some of you will know that there was a bank crisis in 1921, and if my math serves me right, the year 1921 comes before the year 1929. Anyway, in 1929, when the stock market crash precipitated a worldwide financial crisis, confidence, there's that word again, was not restored until after 1933. Confidence is very important in confidence games. And that's exactly what banking is. It's a confidence game, as we've defined from Black's Law Dictionary in a previous broadcast. And the effects of the panic were felt throughout the Great Depression of the 1930s. From 1929 to 1974, the Western nations did not experience any panics, although there were a number of business booms and recessions. Those would be called business cycles. Now, I mentioned in a previous broadcast that the most egregious, I guess I'd call it, losses, not only in terms of dollar volume, but percentages, occurred in 1968 that exceeded the crash of 1929. That doesn't seem to get mentioned here in Columbia. Okay, so now, I've got a question for you. My first question: how many of these financial panics, about which I just read, could have occurred in the total absence of banks, banking, and bank credit? So the answer is 0. But, of course, that's a ridiculous argument, isn't it? Why? Well, first, because it's too simple. And second, because of a conflict of interest that pits simple truth against America's bank-funded, instant gratification, throwaway lifestyle. And this explains why Columbia Encyclopedia says that students of economic cycles have paid much attention to the process of panics. Remember they said that, but without definitive results. When they're desperate to preserve a system of credit that violates every economic principle of Scripture and America's common law, perhaps on behalf of the bankers who funded those meticulous studies, why would their results be definitive? It's much easier to cast aspersions on panicky depositors, wild speculators, and the inelastic nature of that barbaric metal called gold and the lesser barbaric metal called silver. So let's see what is meant by economic cycles, after which we'll address the topic of speculation in the world of John Law. And I can see that with the time we have available, we're not going to get very far in that part of the message. But I'm going to turn to a college economics textbook called Economics Principles and Applications, written by two economics professors, Mr. Dodd and Mr. Hasek. And they have the cooperation of a third economist who's going to review their work. This is now the third edition. This one was published in 1957. In previous broadcasts, I have quoted from their first edition, which was 1948. Okay, now Economics Principles and Applications has a subtitle section dealing with the business cycle. The business cycle in this publication is found at page 536 to page 544. That's 8 pages. But you know what? This book is 800 pages long, 797, not counting the index, and the index puts you well into 800. And yet there's not one sentence in this 800-page book about the United States Constitution and how it restricts public offices, all of them, local, state, and federal, to accepting and using nothing but lawful money, which was defined by statute as gold or silver coin of the United States. I'll even quote you one that was more recent in American history, at least up till 1980, and that was found at Title 12, the United States Code at Section 152, wherein it says the terms lawful money or lawful money of the United States shall be construed to mean gold or silver coin of the United States. That is pretty definitive. Okay? Now, here's what they say about the business cycle. Quote, the national income is subject to various types of disturbance. But the most important is the business cycle. That's the cycle that students of economics study, they say, and they couldn't come to any definitive results as to what caused it. What is called a business cycle may be considered as a process of cumulative change over periods longer than a year, during which all parts of the economy display marked changes in activity as they move through periods usually called prosperity, recession, depression, and recovery. Now, I'm going to stop there. Prosperity is caused by the banks infusing the marketplace with lots of credit. That's usually going to be followed somewhere down the road by a recession, eventually a depression, and then they're going to try to recover. Okay? Now, this is the business cycle. Now, they say because of the perverse character of these cumulative changes and their persistence, I'm now on page 537 of Dodd and Hasek's book, because of the pervasive character of these cumulative changes and their persistence during many years, it has been assumed that they inevitably accompany all complex modern national economies, although they appear most clearly in those economies where free markets and private enterprise prevail. End quote. I would say that that's where banks prevail. And it appears that free enterprise and what they call free markets are the cause, somehow, that these must somehow be flawed systems. It's my contention that as soon as you have banks and you've legalized what they do, you no longer have a free enterprise capitalist economy. Anyway, what's wrong with economic speculation? Because they brought that up as well. What is speculation? Well, according to Random House College Dictionary, 1982, speculation is the engagement in business transactions involving considerable risk for the chance of large gains. Well, is there anything inherently immoral or unlawful about taking considerable risk in the hopes of reaping a large gain for so long, or for so doing? All business ventures entail some degree of risk, but the precise vehicle used in speculation might be an object of our concern. I guess it would probably be propitious a moment to recap what we've discussed already. We have reviewed very briefly the short train of financial panics that beset America during the 1800s and in 1907. And we're only dealing with about, maybe 5 or 6, possibly 7 at the outside, bank panics in the space of, 110 years, let's say. So it's not as though these panics were occurring every other week. But those bank panics had a reason. There was a cause. But for some reason or other, students of economics haven't quite been able to agree on the cause of these panics. And I'm going to assert as my premise, and I will continue to build on this premise as I have continued to do so in the past, that bank panics are caused by banks. And that if you didn't have banks, bankers, and bank credit, it would be impossible to have bank panics. But America is a rather heady, lusty, avaricious bunch of people. Not all of them, of course. And there are people who just love to use the money they don't have. Listen to them extol the virtues of a credit card, for example. It's fun and it's wonderful to be able to spend money you don't have. Well, the whole system is doing that. The federal government doesn't have any money. There isn't any money in circulation. And, of course, there's somebody out there who's maybe a new listener, and they're saying that's absolutely absurd. Of course there is, because Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Time Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, everybody tells us about the money problem and the amount of money that is infused into the economy. So here's my reward. 100 pounds of money to you, dear listener, if you can identify the substance of the money, measured in dollars, that the government collects, spends, or wastes, or that banks pretend to lend. You'll find an email address, probably at my homepage here at Republic. And if it's not there, I'm sure Republic will give it to you, or will somehow notify you as to how to notify me, my mailing address, or even my phone number. And you can claim your reward. But bear in mind, I've made this reward offer for over 30 years. And I have done that over television, radio stations, as many as 80 stations nationwide, coast to coast, and no one is able to claim the reward. So try on earth, please, to be the first one who can claim that reward. I'm telling you, there is no money in circulation, and credit is not a synonym for money, nor is legal tender. Define your terms and you will understand. Okay, so we review a short train of financial panics that beset America during the 1800s and 1907. And these were used to justify creating a central bank for the pretended purpose of protecting the non-bank public from future bank panics. Like the one we had in 2008, that's not over yet. And other things that they were going to protect us from. Well, you decide whether they've been successful in preventing that.